The night was glittering in Victoria Island, Lagos. The charity gala was the kind of event that made people stop and stare. Chandeliers glowing like 1,000 diamonds, violins playing softly, and the hall filled with the richest and most powerful faces in the city. Everyone was dressed in luxury, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and secrets. Amelie entered on Kojo's arm, her emerald green dress flowing like silk water, her beauty turning heads instantly. People whispered her name with admiration, and for a moment she looked like a queen beside her powerful husband. Kojo, as always, carried himself with pride, shaking hands with politicians, business tycoons, and celebrities who treated him like royalty. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, a symbol of success, love, and power. Cameras flashed, capturing their smiles, and Amelie's hand rested lightly on his arm, her posture calm and graceful. But behind her warm smile, her heart was listening. Whispers started moving through the crowd, hushed voices, curious glances, and knowing smiles. Some women covered their mouths as they whispered into each other's ears. Amelie caught the way people's eyes shifted from her to the other side of the hall, then back to Kojo. She felt the change in the air, the way admiration turned into gossip. Something wasn't right. Amelie's chest tightened, but she stood tall. She had learned long ago that silence and composure could be more powerful than panic. What she didn't know was that the night, wrapped in glitter and music, was about to shatter her world. The night seemed perfect, but everything changed in a heartbeat. Amelie had been moving gracefully through the hall, greeting guests with her usual warm smile, when she noticed Kojo's attention drifting. At first, she thought he was simply greeting another business partner or shaking hands with someone important. But then she saw where his eyes rested, on a young woman in a glittering silver gown. Naledi. Her beauty was undeniable, her laughter loud enough to pull attention, and the way she moved made people stare. Whispers grew louder as people noticed Kojo walking toward her. Amelie's heart thudded, a sharp warning in her chest. She told herself it couldn't be what she was thinking, not here, not in front of everyone. But before she could take a step closer, Kojo leaned in. In the middle of the sparkling hall, surrounded by Lagos's most powerful elites and flashing cameras, Kojo pulled Naledi close and kissed her. The sound that followed was not music, but gasps. Plates clinked, wine glasses nearly slipped, and voices rose in shock. People stared, some covering their mouths in disbelief. Phones clicked, flashes went wild. This was a scandal too big to ignore. Amelie stood frozen, the weight of betrayal sinking into her chest like a blade. Her husband, the man she had trusted, had just humiliated her in the most public way possible. Inside, her heart was shattering. Memories of their years together, of sacrifices she had made, of the love she once believed in, all of it spun in her head like broken glass. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand why. But she did none of that. Instead, Amelie straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and smiled. Just a faint, calm smile, as if nothing had happened. That single smile shook the room even more than Kojo's betrayal. Guests whispered louder. Why isn't she crying? How can she smile after this? The hall was buzzing with confusion, shock, and a strange kind of admiration. Amelie's composure was more powerful than tears could ever be. Kojo didn't even notice the storm he had created. He kept laughing with Naledi, basking in the attention, believing his power and status protected him from consequences. But Amelie's silence carried more weight than any words she could have spoken. Her smile wasn't weakness, it was a warning. As the cameras kept flashing, Amelie walked across the hall with slow, steady steps. She didn't rush, didn't break. Her emerald dress shimmered under the lights, her face calm, her pride unshaken. People's eyes followed her, admiration replacing pity. They expected a broken woman, but what they saw was something else entirely, a queen holding her crown even while her heart was breaking. At that moment, Amelie knew one thing clearly. This was not the end of her story. Kojo thought he had won by humiliating her, but he had only planted the seed of his own downfall. The ride home was quiet at first, only the sound of the car engine humming through the dark Lagos streets. The city lights blurred past the window, but Amelie hardly noticed them. She sat still in her emerald dress, her hands resting in her lap, her heart heavy like a stone. The silence between her and Kojo wasn't peaceful. It was thick, sharp, almost choking. She thought maybe he would try to explain himself, maybe show a little regret. But Kojo, leaning back in his seat with a smug smile, broke the silence in the worst way. "You know, Amelie," he said casually, "maybe if you were a little more exciting, I wouldn't need to look elsewhere." His words cut deeper than the betrayal itself. He didn't just cheat. He blamed her for his own disloyalty. Amelie's throat burned, her eyes stung, but she didn't let a single tear fall. She kept her gaze fixed on the road ahead, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Kojo chuckled, shaking his head as if she were the problem. "You're too predictable. Come. A man like me needs fire, not silence." Every word felt like a slap, but Amelie stayed composed. Inside, though, her emotions roared. She remembered the years she had stood by him, the sacrifices she made, the dreams she let go of so he could build his empire. And now he had the audacity to mock her, as if her love and loyalty were worthless. Her chest tightened with anger and pain, but beneath it all, something else began to rise: strength. A quiet, powerful strength that grew with every cruel word he spoke. Kojo thought his arrogance made him untouchable, but Amelie knew something he didn't. She had her silence, and hidden within it was her greatest weapon. The car turned onto the long road leading to their mansion, but for Amelie it felt like a journey into a different future. She sat with her back straight, her face calm, but inside she was making decisions. She could almost hear her own voice in her heart whispering, "Don't fight now. Your moment will come." Kojo laughed again, sipping from a glass of wine he had poured before leaving the gala, completely blind to the storm sitting beside him. To him, Amelie's silence was weakness. But to her it was power. Every second she stayed quiet, she was gathering herself, protecting her dignity, and preparing for the day she would rise. As the car slowed in front of their home, Kojo stepped out first, still laughing, still full of himself. Amelie followed slowly, her emerald dress brushing the ground, her face unreadable. She walked past him without a word, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. That night, lying awake in her bed, Amelie knew one truth: Kojo had broken her heart, but he hadn't broken her spirit, and the silence he mocked would soon become the very thing that destroyed him. Lying awake that night, Amelie's mind wandered back to the days when everything between her and Kojo was different. Long before the wealth, the business suits, and the luxury cars, there had been two young dreamers in Accra. She could still picture it clearly. The little cafe near OSU where they first met, the way Kojo's smile had been shy but full of hope, the way he spoke about building a future bigger than anything they had ever known. He didn't have much then, just big dreams and an old notebook filled with business ideas. Amelie had fallen in love with his determination. He promised her that no matter how high he climbed, he would always hold her hand. "You are my everything," he used to whisper when they walked by the beach at Labadi, their feet sinking into the sand as the waves kissed their ankles. Back then, his love had felt pure, simple, and unshakable. She remembered the small apartment they shared in those early years. The nights when they had little to eat, but Kojo would make her laugh until her stomach hurt, promising that one day she would dine in the finest places. Amelie had given up her own dream of studying abroad to stay with him, working long hours as a teacher while he tried to set up his first business. Every pay she brought home went into their shared future, into rent, into his startup, into his vision. She had believed in him more than she believed in herself. There were nights when Kojo wanted to give up, when failure after failure weighed on him. It was Amelie who reminded him of his worth, who stayed awake helping him write proposals, who prayed with him when doors kept closing. She was the one who encouraged him to stand again after every fall. Slowly, their sacrifices paid off. His business began to grow, doors opened, investors came, and Kojo rose higher and higher. And through it all, Amelie stood beside him, proud of his every achievement, believing his success was their shared victory. She had been there when he bought his first car, when he signed the papers for his first office, when he gave his first speech at a business conference. She clapped the loudest, she smiled the brightest. She believed the promises he whispered, that no matter how wealthy he became, she would remain his heart, his anchor. But now, lying in that vast mansion filled with everything they once dreamed of, Amelie felt the sharp ache of betrayal. The same man who once held her hand with trembling devotion had kissed another woman boldly in front of hundreds. The promises of forever were broken, shattered without shame. Amelie closed her eyes, her chest heavy. She had given him her youth, her sacrifices, her loyalty. She had built him up when no one else believed in him. And now, the man she had loved more than herself had turned her love into her deepest wound. What hurt most was not just the betrayal, but the cruel reminder that sometimes the dreams you build for someone else become the very walls that trap you. Yet, even in that pain, Amelie felt something stir within her, a quiet resolve that she would no longer let her sacrifices be forgotten. Amelie was not as blind as Kojo thought. Long before that humiliating kiss in Lagos, she had felt the changes creeping into her marriage. The late-night phone calls Kojo answered in hushed tones, the sudden business trips that didn't make sense, the smell of perfume that wasn't hers lingering on his shirts. Amelie noticed everything. She never confronted him directly, because she knew Kojo's arrogance would only twist the blame back onto her. Instead, she chose silence, and in that silence she began to plan. For months, she had been slipping away quietly, under the excuse of charity meetings or women's group gatherings. In truth, she was meeting Mr. Kofi, a calm but sharp lawyer in Accra, someone who understood both the law and the delicacy of her situation. In his office, hidden behind thick bookshelves and files, Amelie revealed her suspicions. Mr. Kofi listened patiently, his pen tapping against a notebook as she spoke. "If he thinks you are weak," he told her gently, "let him believe it. That will be your strength." Together they built a case. Amelie collected receipts Kojo forgot to hide, hotel records he thought she would never see, and bank transfers made to accounts under strange names. She saved screenshots of text messages that accidentally popped up on his tablet, and she made copies of documents proving which properties were registered under her name. Every piece was stored in a neat folder, locked away safely in Mr. Kofi's office. Sometimes, after handing over a new set of evidence, Amelie would sit back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. The lawyer would remind her, "This isn't just about catching him, it's about protecting you. When the time comes, you will not be the one left with nothing." Amelie knew Kojo believed she would never dare to leave him, that her silence meant fear. He didn't realize her silence was a weapon sharpening itself in the dark. Every time he mocked her, every time he flaunted his arrogance, she stayed calm only because she knew what he did not. She was ready for the day he pushed her too far. At home, she played the perfect wife, her smile steady, her words soft, her presence calm. Kojo never suspected that beneath her graceful exterior lay signed documents, secret agreements, and hidden power. He carried on with Naledi, laughing loudly, thinking he controlled everything, while Amelie quietly stacked the bricks of her escape. Sometimes, late at night, Amelie would open her handbag and touch the edge of the small folder she carried, a copy of the final divorce papers, ready to be delivered whenever she chose. She would stare at it with both pain and strength, her mind whispering, "One day, Kojo will see that the woman he underestimated is the woman who can destroy him." What no one else knew was that Amelie wasn't just a betrayed wife, she was a woman preparing for war. And when the moment arrived, the explosion would shake more than just their marriage. It would shake Kojo's entire empire. The family dinner in Accra was supposed to be a celebration. The long dining table was covered with golden plates, steaming bowls of jollof rice, grilled tilapia, spicy goat stew, and tall glasses of palm wine. Laughter filled the air at first, but beneath it there was a tension that no one could ignore. Amelie entered gracefully, her dress a soft shade of ivory, her face calm as ever. She greeted the elders with respect, kissed the cheeks of nieces and nephews, and sat down quietly. But just minutes later, Kojo walked in with Naledi at his side. She was dressed in a bold red gown, her smile sharp and deliberate, as if she knew she was walking into hostile territory but didn't care. Gasps slipped from the lips of a few relatives, but no one dared say a word. Kojo introduced her without shame, pouring wine into her glass as though she was the rightful queen at his table. Amelie sat still, her eyes steady, her lips curved in the faintest smile. To everyone else, it looked as though she had accepted her husband's mistress with quiet dignity. But inside, she was watching every movement, listening to every whisper and planning her next step. Kojo, mistaking her silence for weakness, leaned back in his chair, laughing loudly at jokes, placing his hand on Naledi's, flaunting her like a prize. The elders shifted uncomfortably. Aunties exchanged glances but kept their mouths closed. The cousins avoided looking directly at Amelie, afraid of the storm they expected to see on her face. But there was no storm, only calm. That calm was more unsettling than tears would have been. As the meal went on, Kojo grew bolder. He whispered in Naledi's ear, kissed her cheek openly, and looked at Amelie with a smugness that dared her to react. But Amelie only sipped her water, her back straight, her smile soft. She didn't argue, she didn't fight. She let him perform his show of arrogance. Beneath the table, her hand quietly slipped into her handbag. Her fingers brushed against a smooth folder tucked inside, the same folder she had collected from Mr. Kofi earlier that day. The papers were ready. The evidence was stacked. The decision had been made. She pressed her palm against it for a moment, almost like drawing strength from the weight of her own secret. Kojo had no idea. To him, this dinner was another victory, another chance to prove that he could humiliate his wife without consequence. But Amelie knew the truth. Her silence was not submission. It was strategy. Every second she remained quiet, every smile she wore, was a step closer to the moment she would turn the tables on him. Around her, relatives watched closely, whispering under their breath. Some pitied her, some admired her, but none of them could guess the fire she carried inside. Amelie sat at that table like a queen in disguise, calm on the outside but preparing for the strike that would change everything. And when her time came, Kojo would finally realize the cost of underestimating her silence. The dinner table was full of chatter, clinking glasses, and the rich smell of food, but underneath it all was a heavy silence no one dared to touch. Kojo was in his element, laughing too loudly, raising his glass, and showing off Naledi as though she was a trophy. He whispered in her ear, brushed her hand, and leaned toward her with the confidence of a man who thought he owned the world. The family sat stiffly, pretending to eat, their eyes darting from Amelie to Kojo, waiting for the explosion that never seemed to come. Amelie sat quietly, her face calm, her movements graceful. She cut her food slowly, chewed thoughtfully, and never once let her smile fade. To the untrained eye, she looked unbothered, maybe even defeated. Kojo believed it too. He thought her silence meant surrender. And so, in his arrogance, he pushed further, leaning closer to Naledi. His lips brushed hers in front of everyone. The table froze. A cousin dropped her fork, the sharp clatter breaking the silence. An elder coughed awkwardly, trying to cover his shock. All eyes turned to Amelie, expecting tears, shouting, or rage. But instead, Amelie placed her napkin gently on the table and stood. Her chair scraped softly against the floor, yet the sound was louder than Kojo's laugh. With every step she took, the room grew quieter, the air heavier. She reached into her handbag, her fingers steady, and pulled out a slim brown folder. Without a word, she placed it in front of Kojo. The sound of paper sliding across the polished wood was sharp, final. Kojo frowned, confused. Amelie's faint smile never wavered as she looked him straight in the eyes. "You may kiss her all you want now," she said softly, her voice steady and clear. "Because you're free." The room erupted in shock. Gasps echoed like thunder, utensils dropped, and whispers filled the air. Someone covered their mouth in disbelief. Another pressed a hand to their chest. Naledi froze, her smile vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Kojo blinked, then laughed nervously as if it were a joke. "What's this, Amelie?" he asked, flipping through the pages. But the bold letters at the top left no room for confusion. Divorce agreement. His laughter faded as the reality sank in. The signatures were already there. Hers and the lawyer's. Amelie didn't flinch. She simply looked around the table, her calm smile turning into quiet strength. Her dignity filled the room, overshadowing Kojo's arrogance. For the first time, everyone saw who truly held the power. Kojo's mouth opened, but no words came. Naledi slowly pulled her hand away from his, her eyes darting nervously toward the folder. The same relatives who once pitied Amelie now looked at her with admiration. She hadn't just survived the humiliation, she had turned it into her victory. As Amelie picked up her handbag and walked out, her head high, the room was left in stunned silence. And Kojo, once the proud king of the evening, was left holding the papers that ended everything. Kojo stared at the papers in front of him, his lips twisting into a mocking grin. "Amelie," he chuckled, shaking his head. "This is a joke, right? You can't be serious. You wouldn't dare." His voice carried the same arrogance he had worn all evening, but there was a nervous edge beneath it now. He tossed the folder back onto the table as if it meant nothing. Amelie didn't respond. She simply stood tall, her calm silence louder than any words. Just then the door opened, and in walked Mr. Kofi, dressed neatly in a dark suit, carrying another folder in his hands. The room shifted instantly. Everyone recognized him as one of the most respected lawyers in Accra. Kojo's laugh faltered. "Good evening, everyone," Mr. Kofi said politely, his eyes settling on Amelie with a nod of respect. "I believe you've already seen the documents. To make it clear, everything has been finalized. The divorce is legal, and the division of assets has already been registered with the court." The words struck like a thunderclap. Kojo's face drained of color. "What?" he barked, flipping through the papers again, his hands shaking now. His eyes scanned the details, and the truth hit him. Most of the properties, the businesses, the accounts, were all under Amelie's name. He hadn't even realized when she secured them, but every signature, every stamp, was there in black and white. The confident mask he always wore began to crumble. His chest rose and fell quickly as panic replaced his arrogance. "No, this can't be, she can't do this to me," he shouted, but his voice cracked, betraying the fear he was trying to hide. Across the table, Naledi's expression shifted. The bold smile she had carried all night was gone, replaced by unease. She pulled her hand back from Kojo's arm slowly, her eyes darting toward the papers as if she suddenly realized she had hitched herself to a sinking ship. Relatives who had stayed silent through the evening now whispered, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others glancing at Amelie with admiration. Kojo had humiliated his wife in public, but Amelie had outplayed him with dignity and precision. Kojo's voice grew desperate. "Amelie, please, we can fix this. We don't need to do this here. You're my wife, we've built everything together." His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by pleading. But Amelie didn't even need to answer. Her silence and the firm presence of Mr. Kofi were enough. For the first time in years, Kojo wasn't the man in control. His empire, his pride, his power, all of it was slipping through his fingers. And the woman he thought was weak was the one holding it all. The dining room was still heavy with silence after Mr. Kofi's announcement. Kojo sat hunched forward, flipping desperately through the divorce papers as though reading them over and over might change the truth. His face glistened with sweat, his jaw tight with panic. The man who had strutted in with so much pride now looked small, cornered, almost pitiful. Naledi shifted uneasily in her chair. The sparkle in her eyes, the confidence she had worn like perfume, began to fade. She glanced at Kojo, then at Amelie, then back at the documents lying open on the table. For the first time, she seemed to see Kojo clearly, not as the untouchable businessman, but as a man stripped of his power. Kojo reached for her hand, forcing a smile. "Don't worry, my love. She's bluffing. I'll fix this." But Naledi didn't smile back. Her hand remained limp in his, her red-painted nails tapping nervously against her glass. She had come to this dinner expecting to stand beside a king. Instead, she was realizing she had tied herself to a sinking man. Amelie watched quietly, her expression unreadable, her calm presence filling the room with strength. She didn't need to say a word. The truth was unfolding by itself. The relatives who once pitied her were now whispering words of admiration. "Look at her dignity," one aunt muttered. "She's stronger than all of them." Kojo noticed Naledi's silence. His voice turned sharp. "What's wrong with you? You're with me, aren't you? You're not leaving me because of this." His desperation echoed across the table, but Naledi pulled her hand away. "I didn't sign up for this," she said quietly, her eyes flicking toward Amelie with a mix of guilt and fear. "You said you had everything under control. You said she was nothing." Kojo's face twisted in anger. "She is nothing," he shouted, pointing at Amelie. But even as he said it, his voice cracked, and everyone in the room knew the truth. Amelie was the one with everything, and he was the one with nothing. Naledi stood slowly, adjusting her red gown, her face hardening. "You're finished, Kojo. Without her, you're just another man with debts and pride." She didn't wait for his reply. She picked up her clutch, turned, and walked out of the dining room. The sound of her heels against the marble floor was like a final drumbeat sealing Kojo's humiliation. Kojo reached after her, his voice breaking. "Naledi, wait, please." But she never turned back. Silence followed. Only Kojo's ragged breathing filled the room. The relatives avoided his eyes, their sympathy gone. Their gazes shifted to Amelie, who still sat tall, her calm smile steady. For them, she was no longer just a wife. She was a woman who had been betrayed, humiliated, and yet had risen above it all with grace. Kojo sat there abandoned, by his lover, by his pride, and by the very power he thought made him untouchable. And Amelie, without lifting a finger, had won. Amelie rose slowly from her chair, every movement graceful, every step steady. The entire dining room watched her in silence. She didn't glance at Kojo, who sat slumped with his face pale and his pride shattered. She didn't need to. Her silence had spoken louder than his arrogance ever could. Relatives turned their heads to follow her, some with tears in their eyes, others nodding with quiet respect. For the first time, she wasn't seen as the humiliated wife. She was seen as the woman who had taken back her power. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked out, the sound echoing like a victory drum. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with freedom, not pain. For so long she had carried the weight of betrayal, but now that weight was gone. Sliding into the back seat of her car, Amelie closed her eyes for a moment. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from weakness. It was release. She wiped it away and let a small smile curve her lips. "Sometimes," she whispered softly, her voice steady and sure, "betrayal frees you to find your true worth." The driver started the engine, and as the car pulled away, Amelie leaned back, her emerald earrings glinting under the city lights. She wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was reborn. The last image burned in everyone's memory. Amelie, smiling through her tears, her head held high, a woman who had turned her pain into power. It was the kind of ending that left goosebumps, a reminder that dignity always outshines betrayal, and that true strength is born in the fire of heartbreak.